Okay, let's dive right into this explainer with a situation that honestly sounds like a paradox. Imagine a medical mystery where a highly advanced laboratory does its job absolutely flawlessly. We're talking meeting every single technical standard to perfection. And yet, the patient still suffers. How on earth is that possible? Well, today, we're tracing the journey of a clinical specimen to uncover why true diagnostic integrity actually begins long, long before any scientific testing even happens. So, what really happens when perfect science gives us a completely dangerous result? To figure that out, we need to step into the high-stakes, adrenaline-fueled environment of a bustling microbiology lab. It's just after 9 a.m., and the chaotic morning rush has hit its absolute peak. I want you to picture the reception bench right now. It is literally flooded with clinical samples arriving from every ward and outpatient clinic you can think of. We've got urines, sputums, wound swabs, critical blood cultures, you name it, it's there. The laboratory staff are working at a frantic, almost dizzying pace. They're checking request forms, urgently assigning lab numbers, and routing every single specimen to its proper testing section. It is a highly coordinated, incredibly high-pressure environment where time is always, always of the essence. Now, hidden among these hundreds of routine, everyday arrivals is a small, perfectly ordinary-looking sterile container. It holds a urine sample from a 67-year-old patient who was just admitted with a fever, severe confusion, and painful urination. Naturally, the clinical team strongly suspects a urinary tract infection. And because the patient's symptoms are so severe, the clinician has slapped an urgent label on the request for microscopy, culture, and antimicrobial susceptibility testing. At a glance, nothing about this little plastic container suggests it's about to become ground zero for a massive laboratory investigation. But here's where things get real. At the reception desk, a critical discrepancy pops up. On the physical container itself, the patient's surname is this completely illegible scribble. And the hospital number? It's missing digits. But sitting right next to it is a pristine, flawless request form containing the patient's full, accurate details. Now remember, the lab is absolutely slammed. Specimens are piling up by the minute. The scientist looks at the two, compares them, and makes a fateful split-second decision. They just assume the two belong together, and they accept the sample. From the exact second that flawed specimen gets scanned into the system, the laboratory staff executes their technical duties with absolute scientific brilliance. It's kind of amazing to watch, but this is exactly where the illusion of perfection begins. The messy, uncertain human element of reception is left completely behind, and the rigorous, highly controlled protocols of clinical science take the wheel. The procedure that follows is executed flawlessly. First, microscopy reveals features that strongly point to an infection. Then, the culture medium is inoculated. Fast forward to the next day, and significant bacterial growth is successfully observed, isolated, and identified. Finally, the susceptibility test is performed without a single hitch. Every possible technical benchmark is met with flying colors. But here is the massive twist in our story. Despite all of this technical perfection, something goes terribly, terribly wrong. The clinician gets the report, reviews the results, and adjusts the 67-year-old patient's antimicrobial therapy exactly as the lab guided them to. But as the hours tick by, the patient's condition just doesn't improve. The clinical picture is completely clashing with the scientific data. Why? Because the specimen that just ran through that brilliant, flawless process, it didn't actually belong to that patient. Meanwhile, all the way across the hospital, another patient whose sample was collected around the exact same time is getting lab results back that make absolutely zero sense for their symptoms. Alarm bells start ringing everywhere. The medical team is basically forced to put on their detective hats. They call up the lab and ask a truly terrifying question. What exactly happened here? And just like that, the laboratory is formally asked to launch a deep dive investigation into their own flawless results. To piece together this puzzle, the team knows they can't just stare at a culture plate. They have to trace the specimen's journey in reverse. So they work backward from the final report, moving through susceptibility testing, identification, culture, and initial processing, all the way back to the reception desk. And what do they find in this internal phase? Zero errors. None. The science was utterly unassailable. But continuing this backward journey out of the lab and into the hospital wards, investigators finally uncover the root of the nightmare. 2 urine specimens had been collected from 2 different patients within a very short, chaotic time frame.
somewhere in the mundane, seemingly simple steps of patient identification, collection, labeling, and transport. Long before the sample ever hit that reception bench, their true identities became hopelessly tangled up. Which inevitably sparks a really uncomfortable conversation. We have to ask ourselves, who actually made the mistake here? Was it the nurse who collected the specimen? The person who hastily scribbled the label? The porter who transported it? The swamp scientist who accepted an incomplete container? Or are we looking at a catastrophic failure of the entire healthcare system itself? Honestly, the toughest pill to swallow in all of this is that the error could have been prevented at any one of these multiple points if anyone, had just stopped the process. The patient's identity could have been verified right before collection. The container could have been labeled directly at the bedside while the patient watched. The identifiers could have been strictly matched against the forms. The reception scientist could have simply rejected the incomplete label. At any moment of uncertainty, literally just hitting pause would have fixed everything. But instead, the machine just kept rolling on. It all boils down to this one crucial reality. Laboratory results can be analytically correct, but clinically wrong. Let that sink in. Flawless culture technique and million-dollar susceptibility testing aren't just inaccurate. They're actively dangerous if the specimen belongs to the wrong human being. All the science in the world cannot fix a foundational lie. This whole scenario really forces us to reframe how we view the entire process. Specimen collection, identification, labeling, and transport, they aren't just minor, annoying administrative chores you have to get through before the real science begins. They are the bedrock foundation of the diagnostic process. The lab isn't just analyzing plastic cups of fluid, it's analyzing biological material from vulnerable human beings whose very survival depends on that data. So, for any students heading into clinical rotation soon, or really anyone working in healthcare, let this be your blueprint. When you're surrounded by hundreds of samples a day, do not let them become ordinary to you. Pay close attention to those vital hidden quality assurance systems humming away in the background. Watch exactly how patients are identified. Observe what actually happens when information doesn't match up. And understand deeply why some specimens absolutely must be rejected. You have to remember this core truth. No amount of technical brilliance, no state-of-the-art laboratory equipment, and no flawless scientific protocol can ever fix a specimen whose identity was ruined before the testing even started. The integrity of the science is 100% beholden to the integrity of the sample's origin. Because the true, complete diagnostic journey doesn't actually start in the lab. It starts with the patient. From the patient to the specimen. Specimen to the lab to the result, and result to the clinical decision. It is one continuous, unbroken chain. A potentially life-saving clinical decision at the very end of that line relies entirely on absolute, unshakable integrity at step one. So the next time a specimen arrives in front of you, before you reach for that culture loop, before you fire up the sophisticated machinery, I want to leave you with a profound question to ask yourself. Look closely at the sample. Look at the label, look at the request form, and ask yourself, can I trust this specimen enough to allow a human being's treatment to depend on the result I'm about to produce? Because answering that question, truthfully and carefully, well, that is where real diagnostic microbiology actually begins.